Thanks for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces here, so I appreciate you coming to join us. So we're going to talk to you today about Terraform on Azure and all of the exciting new, not all of, a lot of the exciting new stuff. We only have a half an hour, so we had to get the most popular stuff. But what we want you to take away from today is get the knowledge and the tools that you can use to actually really use Terraform on Azure to its full extent. So we'll talk about a few different things to kind of highlight there. We'll talk about Terraform export and some of the cool new stuff that we're doing there. We'll talk about Copilot, and I can feel a common sigh when I say Copilot, but hang on. We'll talk about some good stuff there. And then we have AzAPI, and we'll wrap up with some AVM stuff. So AVM is the verified modules that we have, and we'll kind of give a summary of that at the end. So I am Mark Gray. If I step back, I kind of raced into that, but I'm Mark Gray. I'm a product manager on Terraform, so we work closely with HashiCorp on all of the providers and essentially anything to do with Terraform on Azure. And
I'm Steven. I've been working with Mark since I joined Microsoft on Terraform on Azure, and yeah, the two of us are just committed to making the experience as good for all of you as possible, and we're excited to share the stuff we got today.
All right, so let's set the stage on what we're going to kind of walk you through here today using the different tools and technologies that we talked about there. So we have an existing environment that you have in Azure, and we want to get you from that to a new environment that's based on that existing environment, but you want to add some new features and functionality, or not new features and functionality, you want to add some new services to that. So you take that existing environment, deploy a new environment based on that, and add some additional services to that. So we'll talk about how you can do that with some of these tools and in a really efficient way. So I will let Steven start out with the Terraform export stuff. So.
Thanks, Mark. Terraform export has existed for a couple years now, and originally the whole point of it, if you don't mind clicking for me, was that we had a bunch of customers who talked to us and they said, hey, we have a bunch of stuff in Azure, and it all has existed here for a while now, and we need to figure out how to move that into Terraform. And there was a big question around that. Like, how do you sort of do that with state, with all these different HCL code things? So what we ended up doing was we created a tool, and what it essentially did was it was able to reproduce the exact same infrastructure, or rather managed to take all of the existing resources and get them into Terraform HCL code with a state file attached if you wanted it. And that was Azure Export for Terraform. And we announced that a little while back. There's a GitHub that I think is on here. If we click, maybe not. But the whole point of it is that we wanted to go ahead and help everybody with that. But the number one thing that we heard when we talked to people was they're like, hey, can I do this in the portal? Every person we talked to. And we didn't even bring it up ourselves. We were just like, hey, there's this cool thing. What would you like to see more of? And they're like, hey, can we get it in the portal? And I have talked with Mark about this for a while now, and we're really excited to talk about the Azure Portal experience for export for Terraform. So Azure Portal export, it sounds exactly like what it is. It's coming out soon, but I'm going to run a quick demo to show you what this experience is going to look like. So let's see here. Over here, we have a resource group, this same one that we just talked about with setting the stage. And all that we need to do is go ahead and come over here, go down, and there is, for some of you who are familiar with the ARM template export experience, it's the exact same tab right here, or blade, the export template. And now it's not just ARM template. You'll see that there's a bicep one coming out, as well as a Terraform one. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Terraform. And in the span of seconds, at least when we did it before we do it live, there it is. We have our configuration all here. And what I can do is, what we've purposefully done is we've actually exposed all the different configurable properties here. So this is not going to be the best code to copy and paste and immediately Terraform plan with. But with some massaging and modifying of the code, you're going to end up with a pretty solid template overall, and you can modularize that. You can go ahead and start using it with Terraform as you need. This is coming out very, very soon, but for those of you who want to get some access to trying out that functionality, in the interim, we have a private preview that's coming out. And that is, oops, I hit twice. That is going to be available to our community members. So if you sign up for the community, we're going to have a QR code at the end of this session. We're going to send out some instructions and help you get some access to it. The portal experience itself is still in final testing stages, but we actually have CLI and PowerShell commandlets. So for those of you who love your scripts, go ahead and play with that and see what you can do with it. We think you'll really like it. So, all right. With all that, I'll turn it back over to Mark, who is going to talk about Copilot.
All right. So as Stephen walked through here, we have a new environment. We have a virtual network and PostgreSQL and some other networking stuff that were directly exported from existing code. That existing code, as you can imagine, could have been deployed with ARM templates. It could have been deployed through the portal. It really doesn't matter how that was deployed. Using the portal, now you can just export that Terraform code, stick it into Visual Studio Code, and be on your way. So with that existing infrastructure, we want to add a way to host containers and expose them to the internet. And in this particular scenario, we'll talk about a few different scenarios, but in this particular scenario, you can assume that you're not super familiar with the options that you have in Azure to deploy container-based applications. So we will kind of walk through that demo there as well. So where is Copilot when we talk about Copilot? And you all sigh again. I want to give you kind of some highlights on what Copilot will offer you, or what it does offer you now. And there is GitHub Copilot in Visual Studio Code. A lot of you may have used that and kind of thrown your hands up and said, this doesn't work for Terraform, because it uses the large language models directly, and the large language models are not trained specifically for Terraform. So what we've done in the portal is actually have what's essentially a RAG model that we use to enhance the large language models. So when you ask a question, we have specific examples that we use to augment, so you get much higher quality responses. So you're not relying on some generic training of the model. We are doing this specifically to give you high quality answers for Terraform. So that gives you kind of confidence in the answers. Obviously, it is a large language model and generative AI, so it's not going to give you the exact same answers every time, but we do augment it, so we give you some good answers there. It is based on Azure RM, so we'll talk about AzAPI later, but the Copilot right now gives you answers for Azure RM, and it is Azure specific, so you can't go in there and ask it how to deploy something else in another cloud or anything like that. So, some of the scenarios that we have, so just to show you, most of you should have access to this. It is available to everybody. There are some organizations that prevent you having access to Copilot, but it's just if you go to the portal, the main portal, any page on the portal, you can go up to Copilot and select Copilot and then just ask it, give me a Terraform configuration for blah. You can be as specific as you want or as generic as you want, and it'll help you generate that configuration. Some of the scenarios that we see customers wanting to use this for, or this being valuable for them in, is if you're new to Azure, so you're an architect or something like that, and you're very familiar with the infrastructure out there, but you're kind of new to Azure and you want to get some help with generating some configurations and those types of things. You can actually use Copilot to not only explain some of the Azure concepts to you, but then once you get an understanding of those concepts, you can say, all right, great, show me how to do this in Terraform, and we'll generate the configuration for you there. Another scenario is if you're new to Terraform, so you are familiar with Azure, you've worked with Azure for a long time, maybe you've been deploying with the portal, and you want to take that next step and actually convert to code, you can actually be much more specific. So you don't have to have the Copilot explain the Azure concepts to you. You just want Terraform code from that. So you can use your expertise that you have in Azure and just say, give me the Terraform code for this. And it'll do all the translation on what the properties are from the Azure RM provider and all of that for you. The last scenario, which we're going to be actually using in our example, is if you are familiar with both Azure and Terraform. Azure changes on a frequent basis if you have not figured that out. There are new services and features that are added on a regular basis. And getting up to speed on those and understanding how to code those in Terraform is something that you'll do on a regular basis. So in this scenario, you actually can have a Copilot tell you how to actually code that in Terraform without having to walk through the portal. So we have a lot of customers that have explained to us that their process for new services and features that come out is they go to the portal, they go through the create experience in the portal, they look at the ARM template and say, okay, this is the code I need here. Now how do I turn that into Terraform? And the Copilot will hopefully prevent you from having to do that. You can actually just go ask the Copilot, there's this new service thing here, how do I do that in Terraform? So let's actually jump into a demo here real quickly, and I'll show you that experience. All right, so over here back in the environment, first of all, we have a configuration here that's already been set up. So the code that Stephen exported here, we have already shown here. We have some provider information. So you have your configuration there, and you want to actually add that new service to that. So if you go back to the portal here and say Copilot, you can ask questions like, what options you can ask what options you have to deploy a container-based app in Azure, and this will actually use the documentation handler. So it'll go to all of the documentation in Azure and figure out what some options are there for you. So you can kind of get that information of how do I actually do this in Azure. And you can get a bunch of different options there. You can look through those options and figure out, okay, based on this explanation, this is the container-based approach that I want to take. And then you can go from there and say, you could ask it for some recommendations on that, and it could give you some recommendations, but I am going to go with the choice of a container or a container app and ask Azure how to actually configure that using Terraform. So you can see here that in the question, as long as I mention Terraform, it's going to get routed to our handler and be able to give you that configuration. So if I hit return there, it will go get routed. So you can see the generating Terraform configuration. That gives you the information that it's actually routed to our handler and actually giving you a good solid response there. And it will generate that configuration and give you a summary at the end of that. So if we look at the response here, you'll be able to see that it gives you a code snippet here that you can copy and gives you a summary of what is in that configuration so you can get an understanding of this is really what you want. So from there, if you copy that configuration, if that copied, you can actually come back over to your code and just drop that code in here. And what you will notice here, which is not the case a lot of times when you're using the GitHub Copilot, is I drop the code in there and you're not seeing any red squigglies, meaning that the code is invalid. We've actually used that RAG approach to give you some good working code here. And you can use that as a good starting point. You can also see that we don't just dump generic examples in. We give you some variables and things like that that you can actually grab this and add your own tweaks to it and stuff. So it's some much more sophisticated code, if you will. Not super sophisticated, but more sophisticated than you get out of the generic large language models. So you can use that and then continue building your configuration from there and be much more well on your way. So from there, I want to talk about some of the things that we have coming soon. So this is a pretty simple example, if you will. One of the primary things that we're focused on is quality. We want to make sure that you can depend on those responses that we give you, but there are a number of other things that we focus on as well. So from a quality perspective, we are always looking at the latest large language models to see if they help out with our responses. So we'll be continually updating to those if we need to, if it helps out. We are working on our RAG approach and other approaches to increase the chances of answering your questions accurately. And we're also looking at doing validation. So right now, the process that we take is we ask RAG and we go through the RAG process, send some examples to the LLM with your question and get a response back and return that to you. One of the things that we're looking at doing is adding the Terraform validate step to that. We had prototyped that early on, and we saw some serious delays, like it was taking a long time to kind of get to a good answer. But we're working on optimizing that, so essentially you will not only have a good chance, you will know that whatever the answers are that come out of there are valid Terraform syntax, and you can go from there. In addition to that, we're working on expanding the scope. So right now, like I mentioned, we have support for Azure RM. We want to expand that to support AzAPI. We actually have that in a prototype now as well, so that should be out really soon. And we also want to support modules. So we have Azure verified modules that we'll talk about at the end. We want to add support for that as well. And from a better context perspective, a lot of the feedback that we've got from customers is, that's great that you can give me these code samples, but we want it to be based on our practices and our processes and stuff like that. So we're looking into if there are ways that we can utilize your configuration. So if you have a project that has a bunch of naming syntaxes and stuff like that in there, can we use that when we provide your answer, so you don't have to go through and say, well, that's great that you gave me this name, foo. I want it to kind of align with my company practices, and potentially use your deployed infrastructure as well. And the last thing that customers have told us is, this is great, it's in the portal, but I don't spend a lot of time in the portal. I spend time in VS Code in my experience. So we're working on adding the experience to VS Code as well, and giving a better experience when you're in the portal. You saw the sidebar in there. You can't really see the code very well in that sidebar. So we're looking at, can we expose a full screen experience so you can actually see the code in there, it's highlighted and all of that. So you can actually do some iteration in that portal and then kind of copy it to VS Code from there. All right, so as we kind of finish up the GitHub or the Copilot stuff, I want to show you a quick demo that we've done of the prototype for VS Code integration here. So.
Extension in VS Code to generate a Terraform template for creating an OpenAI deployment. After receiving the generated template, we proceed with a Terraform plan to draft the deployment. However, as you can see, it throws an invalid resource type error. This indicates that the native chat extension has encountered hallucination issues. Next, we ask the same question to the Azure Terraform chat participant. Unlike the native solution, this participant uses a better-tuned prompt. It employs RAG and validation loopback to minimize hallucinations. When we rerun Terraform plan on the newly generated template, you can see there are no errors and the template is valid. With just one click from the chat window, user can insert the generated template into the open file. By leveraging the Azure Terraform chat participant, users can significantly improve the accuracy and efficiency when writing their Terraform deployments. Try it out today and experience the difference.
All right, so hopefully that gives you some stuff to look forward to with Copilot, and you'll find that helpful as we release this stuff. So next, I will hand it back to Stephen to continue on with AzAPI.
Thanks, Mark. Let's talk about the AzAPI provider. This is a provider that we've really spun out initially to kind of help with a lot of your day zero services. There was stuff that you're waiting for support for in Azure RM, and AzAPI was sort of marketed initially as a stopgap or a gap filler. That messaging, today we kind of want to talk about some of the changes we've made to it, but we also want to talk about some of the new features that are coming out. So 2.0 is here. It's coming out this week, and we want to talk about some of the different things that are bringing with 2.0 to the table. Obviously, we've done everything here with the old infrastructure, setting up that container app using Copilot, and now we're just adding in a container registry. We've just gone down the decision tree, and we think that AzAPI will be good for that. And that is because we want to stay up to date on the latest features, which is one of the things that we think this provider is fantastic at doing. So what's new with 2.0? There's a lot of things, but just to cover a few. First of all, no more JSON. ARM templates is so 2015 or whatever it was. We have JSON be gone. So beginning to end, there's no more JSON inputs, outputs, properties, any of that stuff. It's HCL from the beginning, it's HCL to the end, which means you also get all the HCL benefits that you're looking for. You get some more clarity with outputs now. So there are different ways to essentially configure an export of your values. You can choose to basically get a path to an output value, or you can just get the specific value of that output on its own. We actually have a little example here that kind of highlights that. You can now use this little dot export with these square brackets, and that actually will be a list. It'll give you essentially the export results all listed out as a full list of properties rather than just the individual value of something in that path. Now, moving on here, we have a retry block now. So when you're expecting those errors to occur because of the resource creation might take a bit or otherwise, you can actually define this user configurable retryable error system, link it up with your timeouts, and you can essentially just keep retrying to wait for that resource to be created. And this will help you just avoid a lot of those annoying errors that can now be digested by continuing to retry. We've added support for pre-flight. Pre-flight is a great validation that helps you fail fast. So if you have a large configuration and it happens that your 58th resource is this VNet here with an address prefix, and while you're eating your food over the computer like an unhygienic developer, your hand slipped, you hit a 0, well, the good thing is that you are going to end up failing fast because the address prefix will immediately be validated by pre-flight. It'll come back and say, hey, that's not going to fly, and you don't have to sit there for 45 minutes for something to go ahead and return an error. Resource discovery is now something that we have. We have the ability to essentially use the data source called AzAPI resource list, and what it can do is it can list anything under what is considered like a parent. So it can be a subscription, it can be a resource group, it can even be all the subnets under a virtual network. So that's very great at essentially scoping and figuring out stuff. If you want to figure out what the heck is in your environment, you can use this functionality to get yourself set up for success. And with provider functions coming out, AzAPI has support for that. We have a few different ways that works with resource IDs. So this is just a little idea of how you can do it by essentially constructing a resource ID. There's a lot of handy ways that you can kind of manipulate these resource IDs, whether it's constructing them or splitting them up or creating subscription or management or tenant group IDs as well. And then we have our VS Code extension. And we have put in a lot of effort to improving this extension. And if you haven't yet, hopefully by the end of this demo, you realize that the VS Code extension is a great tool that you should totally use. If you go ahead and ever take any of those resource JSONs that you guys will see on the portal, or you just take an existing ARM template, you can actually, with the upcoming release of the VS Code extension, get a paste as AzAPI just on the spot like that. So you don't have to finick with anything. You just Control V or Command V, depending on which device you think is superior, and you go ahead and run away with that. And then we also built in some migration support. So we have an upcoming release of V2 of what was formerly a tool called AzAPI to Azure RM, which I think you probably know what that tool did. But now it supports also going from Azure RM to AzAPI. So we've renamed it because that name is no longer accurate, and we've called it Azure Terraform Migrate. And that tool is actually going to be embedded into your VS Code. So you can highlight a resource, and then it'll give you a little pop-up. You can use that pop-up and essentially migrate within your VS Code. That's a lot of stuff I just covered. Let's see what AzAPI looks like in action. So I'm going to go ahead, go back here. We've got our Copilot all spun up. We've got all this stuff. Now we're going to go and we're going to try to configure a container registry. So I have conveniently, how'd that happen? Little registry.tf resource. So I want to go ahead and create an AzAPI resource, and we're just going to call it demo. And what I can do here is, that didn't work. If I actually go and hit Control space on this, they will actually load a code sample, which of course does not show up when I want it to. But normally, when the demo gods are with us, it will actually load a code sample. And if you just hit Enter, it'll go ahead and put all that out. It's fine. We'll do it the hard way if you want to be like that. We can go and do Microsoft.container registry. For those of you who haven't used AzAPI before, it is, for anyone who's used Bicep, very similar to the type experience there. So you can go ahead and create a registry, and then you can essentially point at a provider, or sorry, an API version. There are a couple preview APIs. I like stable APIs, so I'm going to go with the stable one, but you can use whatever you prefer. And then the nice thing about AzAPI is that everything is very much under this generic resource. So naming is very consistent. If I want to go ahead and name this however the heck I want, that is going to be if I want to go ahead and configure a resource, the properties are going to be consistent each time through and through. So now all I need to do is go and hit body equals, and now you decide to work. So we can actually hit this, and our required properties will show up, which according to the schema validation is just this SKU. That doesn't look pretty, but all we need to do then is specify the SKU in theory, and then we can, like GitHub Copilot is helping me out here, as well as my VS Code extension. And we have this container registry. Now, if the code sample were to work, what you would see is, I actually think I have a slide, so I'll show it in a second. Basically, the generated code will have all the default properties that would make sense to configure, and you can go ahead and work your way through that. Another thing that I want to highlight is that we actually have, for imperative commands, you can use the AzAPI resource action. We support both a resource and a data source. So if you use AzAPI resource action here, and you do a quick little demo, you can actually, I can barely see what's going on there. You can actually create for yourself here a build task. So I could go, hey, I'm going to create this build task. Registries. Am I hitting that? Yep. And I can go and create a build task, cause it or tell it to run, and then basically the way that it'll work is when I do a Terraform apply, it'll finish applying the pre-existing resource, which I will just quickly show you will be pointed at. I'm skipping the API version just for time's sake. You would just point the resource ID like this, and then your method would be you would just run this, and then it would essentially just start the build task for you. When you do Terraform apply, since you have the implicit dependency, it'll just wait for the container registry to finish building, and then you will be well on your way. Yeah, so this is what it would look like after you use the code sample and you kind of just filter things down, and then you have your action is build and your method is post. Always have a backup in case your demo gods are not with you. Let's talk about the guidance to these providers. So we have Azure RM now, and we have AzAPI. What is the sort of recommendations around that? Well, I think that from both a Microsoft and a HashiCorp perspective, we think that both of these providers are first class. We think that we work closely in partnership. We think that both can provide and meet your infrastructure needs in different ways. Azure RM has and will continue to meet your needs in terms of a stable and simple experience. The developer teams work hard on the implementation of the provider to make sure that it is just a really simplified and straightforward experience for you. They handle versioning for you, so if you're not into trying to figure all of that out, there is a lot of simplicity to be had and a lot of ease here, as well as just the years of documentation and versions and resource-specific docs, as well as the examples. AzAPI, on the other hand, really gets you that cutting-edge access, and it gets you the ability to specify resource version. Rather than needing to upgrade the entire provider, you can actually just upgrade the resource API version itself and quickly switch your container registry to the latest version or a preview version if you so desire. The fine-grained control from the resource listing to the resource action. We didn't even talk about update resource, which can kind of just make a quick patch, if you will, on an existing resource. There's so many things that this provider does, and we continue to get surprised by what the community pulls out using this provider on us. So it is really cool just seeing all the different fine-grained things that are there. And then, of course, we have this VS Code extension, which has the resource-specific code samples to get you started. I promise it's going to work on your device. It'll just not work on this one when I'm live. So when are we going to finally be able to use all of that? We are planning to release all of this, the new Azure migration tool, the new AzAPI provider, and the new VS Code extension this week. We're doing some final quality checks on that, and we're going to go ahead and ship that to you. So please stay tuned and keep an eye out for that. So with that, I'll hand it back to Mark.
All right. Don't want to keep you all from lunch, so I will zip through this last part real quickly here. We do want to make sure that you are aware of Azure Verified Modules. So it's a program that we have within Microsoft where we develop modules that incorporate Microsoft best practices into them. We have like security and all of that kind of stuff. So there are two types of modules. There are resource modules and pattern modules. You're probably familiar with that concept. We include that in here. We have about 80 modules currently there that cover a whole slew of different scenarios, and there are 90 more that are in the backlog for that. So it's a very active project, and you should go check it out. So if you go to aka.ms/avm, you can get information on what modules are available and all of the concepts and practices that we have there. So definitely go check that out. If you have any questions, we have folks that are AVM experts in the booth, so come down and talk to us, and they can answer any of your questions around that as well. We hope you all learned a lot today and are going to go out there and use Terraform to really speed up your Azure deployments and all of that. So.
And if you want to get more involved in terms of all of the different learnings, so that top right QR code, that is the community. If you scan that one, that's how you're going to get an invitation to the private preview of the portal experience. We also have regular monthly community calls, a Slack channel, a ton of things that are going on there. And maybe, just maybe, they learned about some of this stuff a little ahead of time. So if you want inside scoops, definitely join the community. Sign up for a product group conversation with us. We love getting to meet all of you and hear about your scenarios. And talk to us at the booth, like Mark said. Yeah, we appreciate your time. We appreciate all of you for investing and working on Terraform on Azure. And hopefully we'll be able to see all of you next year. So,
thanks, everyone.